All right. So today we're doing problem solving. So I kind of have this idea about problem solving that it's kind of fundamental to life because through evolution, you adapt and you kind of figure out your environment. And so because that is something that's not even coming from like a nervous system, that's just evolution adapting, then you have all these things that we can talk about today about solving a problem of math, of chess, of all these different things because it comes down to the choices you make and it comes down to kind of those experiences that you gain. And because of whatever it is, your environment, you could have a cell environment adapting to a new scenario. And I think that that is really what kind of drives evolution, but also kind of how we achieve goals, what we do as human beings. Um, if you're good at communicating, for example, it's you're solving the problem of like how to persuade someone or how to get something that you want, or maybe how to make someone feel good. And I think that's kind of like a fundamental thing of how we keep going as human beings is we're always adapting and we're always trying to find the solution. What do you think about
Oh my, Sven talking about evolution right out the jump. I love it. Welcome
that?
back to Deep Plea. In this podcast, we aim to have deep conversations about the world around us just so we can try and learn more. Uh, Welcome back. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like there are certain things wired in us that we take for granted that came from previous generations, right? So whether that's my ability to find food or to understand how to understand my body's responses to different things, whether that's prolonged hunger or thirst or
Yep.
different just environmental circumstances that you may find yourself in.
Right.
And then after that fact happens, you are able to approach that problem because you have experience from, okay, your past, but also the past of ancestors, right? Who,
Yeah.
you know, for better or for worse, give you these sort of genetic programming, and that kind of tells you to do certain things, and one of those things is problem solving. So I think we should all
Yeah.
like understand that this whole idea of problem solving that we think of today is not just like, how they say in school, like, okay, guys, we're gonna break it down
Hmm.
step by step and take
Right.
things very slowly. And yeah, things were taken very slowly over thousands of years, right? Which is
Right.
something that, nobody thinks about. And, I can see why, because it's generally not something that happens on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you have to say about that, son?
Yeah, I think it's interesting now because you talk about how much time has led up, and then now things are speeding up. So, like, uh, you had ancestors, genetic processing, all this stuff, and leads up to now. But now, because of technology, we have these complex issues that we can solve, which is kind of the first time humanity has really stepped into this boundary of like super complex problem solving. So it's not just I'm hungry, I need food. Now it's like this extreme like math formula. It's like how to medically help someone, going through all these different things, and you kind of take from the past and then you take from what you're learning now. So it's kind of like this culmination of like all this information that we have now, which kind of like leads to that.
There's a idea of in the amount of transistors you can pack into a single space called Moore's law,
Yeah.
that every year, I believe, the amount of transistors you could pack into a space would double. And people thought that that might slow down, but maybe it has because the space is
Right.
very limited. But
Yeah.
you can see this astronomical leap into computing power, right? Services like
Hmm.
ChatGPT, cloud providers, they're upping that computational power and the resources. I believe it's called teraflops. Those are
Hmm.
like maybe even more than doubling. So the problem now that we have to solve is, instead of what mathematical formula can I,
Hmm.
solve or figure out in my lab with my three chalkboards that I can flip upside around, the problem is now on a different level. And
Yeah.
problem solving is that compounding, whether it's compounding interest or a compounding problem, or even just a new idea that someone hasn't thought of yet.
Yeah, and speaking of like not thought of, an interesting idea is like lack of information that we have now to solve a problem. So there's this interesting story. There's this during Nazi Germany, there was a statistician. I forget his name. We're gonna have to put his name up after when we figure it out. They hired the statistician to figure out why their planes kept going down. And so the planes would come back and there'd be like bullet holes in this area and there'd be like shrapnel here. And so eventually what happened was that the statistician realized that the planes that they were coming back with actually were actually showing what parts maybe actually armored better than not, because the planes that were coming back that weren't coming back, there's planes that aren't coming back because they got shot down. And so we're actually missing the key information about what made the planes that were supposed to come back not come back, but they were going off of the planes that were able to come back even though there was damage. So they had the right idea, but they actually had the wrong information because they were going off of that essentially.
Yeah, the one of the problems I talk about in one of my classes at school is AI and its accessibility to almost all information. For example, Italy banned ChatGPT because it could use potentially protected information and I believe some private information to train its
Hmm.
model, which can be very damaging in the sense that if it just reveals something, secret about something,
Yeah.
that could be very bad. And the ramifications of these actions, maybe because they wanted to get a product out or they didn't think about they didn't think about the planes that were not coming back in the sense that the data that they engineered into this model cannot be undooed, right?
Hmm.
So, you hit go, you hit enter, you start training for 2 weeks, and it's obviously you keep training it over months and months, and someone says, "Oh, your data set was flawed. What are you going to do? Start
Right.
over?"
Yeah.
We talked about the computational power that it takes to run ChatGPT, and then if you just have to kind of restart, like that doesn't make any sense.
You're
You
right.
have to cut off all that power that you're using. And it's I guess we're going a little bit away from problem solving, but it's more just like, okay, when you actually problem solve, what are the ethical ramifications of your problem solving,
Right.
or the way you approach a situation? Obviously, there are ways that people approach situations in their daily life that lead to racism, sexism, all
Sure.
different types of isms, right? Or
Yep.
phobias. And that's, I guess people we just kind of say that, oh, this person is, some type of label, but we never, even myself now, I'm just thinking about it, we don't say that this person has this way of problem solving. You wouldn't call that problem solving.
Right.
You would just say it's their innate nature or, oh, it's what they've been taught. But that's how they solve their, let's say, problem in the way that they value their importance.
Right.
Or what else am I trying to get at? Like,
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. I also think it's important to integrate problem solving into everyone's life to avoid or have those outcomes that you're mentioning, like depending on what they want. But if you're good at, like I mentioned earlier, if you're good at communicating with someone every day when you do daily tasks, if you solve the issue of efficiency where you can make things more efficient, just in general, your life can be, you can go through life better, easier. You can have the outcomes that you want because if you kind of make it almost habitual to like do these things and like what to look out for, it kind of can be a part of your life, which is kind of what I also mentioned before is that everything you do is to solve a problem. Whether you walk down the street, like getting down the street is neurons firing to your feet that or your legs, like move. And so it's like every little thing is so integral because it's actually solving the problem. Now, what I think is interesting is the idea of what a problem is. I think it's always going to be coming from kind of like the ego or like the brain of a moral compass, what's right, what's wrong, what to do about something. Because if there is no moral compass, if there is no ego, you can't really define something as a problem. It's just like the universe is just going to happen, things are just going to happen, and that's what it is. So I think identifying a problem has to come from some sort of uh, resistance with ego to the natural environment.
so some type of like moral belief, some personal belief, if it's a
Yeah, just
personal
yeah,
problem, or a public belief if it's a public problem, like, I don't know, the virus or something like that.
right. Like we assign the value of being a problem or a solution because it's just what we think. Because for one person, a problem may not be a problem, and for another person, a solution may not be a solution. And so it's also like how you define it is also personal. And people may have different views about it, but I think that it really just does stem from the ego. Because if you didn't do anything and never said something with a problem or solution, like things would just continue happening naturally. So to really say like, oh, I see a problem here is just really coming from the ego mind, I think.
Interesting. I don't know
Yeah.
if I agree, but I also don't know if I can give a good rebuttal.
Gotta solve the problem of articulation.
Solve the problem of articulation of the possible
Yes.
ego that's articulating it. That's fair.
Yep.
Okay, so I also want to bring some practicality into this lesson. We're kind of doing
Yeah.
this on the fly, at least definitely this part. So
Hmm.
we want to talk about each of us, me and Sven, want to talk about a problem in our lives and like based on what we talked about right now, see how we can apply those kind of filters to our current
Yeah.
thinking. So maybe I can start with getting a job, let's say.
Okay.
So, I'm close to graduating college. Yeah, I want to search for a job, right? And I guess getting the job is my problem. So, something we
Hmm.
talked about today was, or first of all, we should be grateful that we have these problems. Some people can't get a job or they don't have their, qualifications. They didn't go to school or whatever it might be. So, I think that's a good first step to realize that, okay, in order for you to actually have this problem, a lot of things had to go right. Like you had to be alive today, and we could go on and on and on about being grateful.
Hmm.
But the point is, be grateful. Okay,
Right.
and then also from what we talked about today, I think I could say like I have to maybe one example could be ethically going about my job search, right? If
Hmm.
there's some company that I find interesting, okay, do some research on them, see what they're about, what do they actually do, and okay, is that something that I want to go into? I mean, a lot of people that I hear, be like, yeah, I'll work for anybody. And it's like, I mean, I guess you would, but
Yeah.
I don't know, notion of will you sleep well at night? And maybe you will because the ethical ramifications may not matter,
Right.
but that doesn't seem like a great way to live. But you also might be doing something great. So there might be a two-sided coin. You might be, it's like the nuclear bomb story, right? You might be building something that's going to kill people, but will save lives in the future. Like,
Right.
and that was an unintended consequence, suppose, of doing
Hmm.
that, of that innovation.
Yeah.
So to say, now I guess I'm going back on my original point, is that okay, you work for this company, go to this company, you might do good things and you might do some poor things, but hopefully those poor things that you do will have a different benefit in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Uh,
All right, Sven, hot
for
seat.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying. I was trying to think as well, like a problem that I have, and I think I identified one as being kind of like like nervous about clinical. So I'm in nursing school, and I have my first clinical day like on the 30th of October, and like in my head, like the idea of putting my hands on people's parents, people's kids, like actually doing things medically on people is very overwhelming. But I like what you mentioned before is like maybe you'll be doing something great, which of course I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be helping people. So it's like to try and actually get myself to this like thought process of like I'm doing everything with good intentions. Because of course the big thing is responsibility. Like I can't make mistakes because you're dealing with actual people. So kind of thinking like, okay, what's the task at hand? Like, how do I get after it? Always safety first in terms of like medical stuff. Like you always have to consider that. And I think a solution to the problem is also going to be exposure, what they call exposure therapy, which is like doing something often enough to the point where you don't really get nervous by it or whatever. And I think I see that because when I do kind of look at other nurses, especially on social media, they always seem like, oh, like I got to do this or that, like, oh, my patient, this, that, like they're not even considering being nervous or anything because they've done it so much. And so it's like I look at other people and I kind of try to identify what headspace they're in, and it tells me that it's like, okay, they've been there, done that. They're just focusing on these tasks and doing different things. So the solution is looking at other nurses that have been through nursing school, and then just doing what I have to do often enough to not be, nervous about it. So those are kind of like the two things I'm thinking that would be a solution to my problem.
I think maybe a good way to say that is to take the nature of somebody else and use it
Yeah.
to lessen your fear on a certain situation.
Yes, especially because a lot of times nurses will say like, "Oh yeah, like nursing school, it's your first time doing everything. Like, of course you'll be nervous." So getting that information as well, um, also helps. Yeah.
Nurse and nervous, they kind of rhyme, actually, when I think about it. A
Yeah.
little bit. Maybe it's just part of the job, Sven, so you'll get used to
Yeah,
it.
definitely. I think also thinking about the positive things, like like thinking about as much positivity as you can. Like this could be applied to anybody, whether that's public speaking, like doing anything where it's gonna be like eyes on you, or you're gonna be held responsible for different things. That's like my main thing is being held responsible. But that's just something that when you like if you were to give a lecture or public speak like 1,000 times, like 1,000 the first time, you'll be like, okay, can we just get this over with? Because you've just done it. You've like worn out the anxiety almost. You know what I mean?
Is okay, I one thing we can talk about is that bad per se? Like
No, I
to
think it's
okay,
good.
you go, actually.
Well, if you mean in reference to the anxiety, I don't think it is because I think initially it was put there for a reason. So evolutionary problem solving is going to say if if you see a snake that looks like a certain way, then you're going to get frightened, or you see a spider because over time we've learned that these things can be poisonous, but through genetics, we sometimes will just naturally have this fight or flight that pops in when things happen. And so this idea that people are like looking at you, for example, I actually thought that if you look back throughout human history, it actually wasn't a good thing if there was actually a bunch of people with eyes on you, because that could have meant that you were captured, or that you somehow like you had a tribe looking at you, like a lot of people looking at you all at once was never really a good thing. The only other thing I could think about is leadership. So having a bunch of people looking at you as a leader, but I think that in itself is intimidating them because it's all this attention of multiple people facing you and like just observing you. And I think that's there for a reason. Just being able to kind of control it and realize like, okay, maybe I'm reacting this way because of physiological issues about it, but not like mentally. And so being able to decipher, things that are physiological versus psychological is also very important. And I think that it's very important, especially when it comes to nervousness, because you actually can think yourself out of it. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I asked, or I don't know if I gave that in the best way. I believe what I was trying to say is if you do something over and over and over again, let's say,
Hmm.
and you're very accustomed to it, maybe this doesn't apply to all scenarios, but let's take public speaking, for example. You give the same lecture 100 times, let's say,
Yeah.
and you memorize the lecture. Uh, is that good in the sense that you are limiting your creativity in a way? So for example, if you're a nurse, right? Every
Hmm.
patient is different. So
Yeah.
in every situation, you have to be creatively using your mind to understand, okay, what does this patient need at this moment? What are
Definitely.
they, what are their vitals? I'm sure,
Hmm. Yeah.
vitals is like a combination permutation that is pretty much infinite. Let's just imagine.
Yeah. Sure.
But
Yeah.
uh, if you're just giving the same lecture and you don't have the anxiety of that, oh, I tried something new this time, or
Yeah.
I have this different approach, is that the best way to kind of take your problem solving skills and to sort of nullify them in order to not make something better, let's say, or
That's
something
it.
more creative or inspiring or entertaining?
Yeah. That's actually a really great question because it made me think if you did the same lecture over and over again, but then randomly someone asked you a question in the audience that was a question that you hadn't really, prepared for, then you actually start having to kind of grow. And this is kind of like a weird analogy, but you'll grow as a person, but you're actually going into information now and then getting new information and being able to explain it that way. Whereas if that never happened, you would have never went into that information. So it's almost like it's not a solution. Maybe it's like a temporary thing, but you actually do limit your growth and, like you said, your creativity and or whatever it may be, because you're not going to be branching out unless you get exposed to those new ideas. So that is a good point that you brought up. I think that it is crucial to actually not remain stagnant, just for the sake of not having anxiety, or not being nervous, because actually, going into those states of nervousness and anxiety will actually, kind of force, not force you, but you'll be able to adapt. I guess we can go back to what we were talking about before, and you'll adapt and you'll grow.
Definitely. I think that's a good place to end is that, yeah, you
Yeah.
will have to adapt and you'll have to grow throughout your life. I'll end with a quote from Seneca. Been reading Letters from a
Oh,
Stoic, and I
beautiful.
believe this was maybe in the introduction or something like that. It's very short, very sweet. You ought to study as long as you are ignorant. In other words, as long as you live.
Love that.
Thank you very much for
Think
coming
about that,
back to the
guys.
Deep Plea.
Yep.
It was fun.
And we're coming back with more. Stay tuned.
Yes, sir. Let's go.